Namaskar and welcome to In Focus. Once again, the subject at the center of the news is the relationship between the BJP and its allies. But this time it also concerns the functioning of the government. Today, in an exclusive interview, one of the most senior, one of the most responsible, the Akali Dal leader and the Minister for Chemicals and Fertilizers and Food, Surjit Singh Barnala, speaks exclusively to In Focus about these twin subjects. Mr. Barnala, the government of which you are one of the most senior ministers has been in power for 3.5 months. How do you assess its performance?
You see, my assessment is good about the performance of this government.
But do you share Mr. Advani's view that in 3.5 months he thinks nothing has really been achieved to give him a sense of satisfaction? He says the government has a long way to go.
Yes, this is his assessment. I slightly differ from him.
What is yours?
Mine is that we have been doing quite well.
And you think that in fact you've achieved a lot?
I think we have been achieving also.
Okay, let me bring something up. This government was created with a lot of hopes, a lot of expectations. In many ways, people said this was a turning point for India. Have those been lived up to, those hopes?
You see, many expectations possibly have not been lived up to because of the number game. The government didn't have a sufficient number to run it the way they wanted to run it. So in a coalition government, you have to see to other problems. There are problems almost every day, there are problems. So in a coalition, you have to be very vigilant, very careful, and to look to many interests, in fact. And that is what engrosses most of your time and leaves very little time for things which you really want to do.
So you're saying in a sense that the government's problems of cohesion are taking up most of its time and detracting from concentrating on the work?
Yes, they do.
Let's talk a little bit about that. One of the impressions in the country is that this is an 18-party coalition government, but it's failing to cohere, it's failing to be united and work effectively. In a sense, that's what you're saying?
Yes, to some extent that impression is correct. With so many parties there, with different interests, their own interest in the states particularly, some of these parties are regional parties, they have their own interests. So they bring out their interest as primary interests.
You're in a way suggesting that their own state interests get priority, national interests in a sense get demoted.
Sometimes it happens like this.
Why is this happening? Is it because the BJP is obstinate and won't pay heed to its allies? Or is it because the allies are raising difficult, impossible demands and embarrassing the BJP?
No, when the national agenda was formed, it was formed with the consensus of all the parties. All of us were there. These matters were discussed, and then a final shape was given to it.
So what happened after that?
Many things which perhaps BJP had in their own agenda, in the agenda of the BJP party, were left out because other parties didn't agree to that. That way, a consensus was formed, and with the consensus, the government had started.
But you're saying two very interesting things. You're saying that the BJP made real sacrifices so that a consensus could be formed.
I think so.
Are you also saying that after the consensus was formed, some of the regional parties have failed to make similar sacrifices and are instead being selfish because they're pushing their personal agendas?
Yes, in a setup like this, when you have a coalition of so many parties, some give and take has to be done.
And it's not happening?
It is sometimes not happening.
Let's look at three of your allies, the Samta Party, the Trinamool Congress, the AIADMK, all of whom have raised demands for dismissing state governments. Is it right that they should use their leverage as members of the national government to pursue personal state interests?
You see, they think these are serious problems in their own sphere. That is why they take it so seriously. Sometimes they walk out from the parliament, sometimes they protest in some other way. So they think the matters are very serious so far as their group or their party is concerned. That is why they agitate like this.
Do you share their sense of seriousness, or are you actually saying they are a little mistaken?
I think that on some policy we have to take a stand. On the misuse of 356, we should take a stand that it should not be misused at all. Particularly my party, because it has been misused against us time and again. At least 7 times it has been misused against us, and all the governments that the Akali Dal had formed in the state were dismissed.
Okay,
by
let
this
me pursue that subject about Article 356, because it's something your party has a very emotional stand on. Now, Samtha, Trinamool Congress put pressure on the Home Ministry to send these fact-finding teams. Was that a correct constitutional step, or in your eyes was it a sign of undue pressure?
You see, sending a fact-finding team is not anything wrong. This a government, central government can do to ascertain the situation in a particular area. They can always do that.
So you don't share any of the criticism that these fact-finding teams were a needlessly assertive, perhaps even a provocative step?
No, they don't have to assert anything. They have only to find the facts there. They have to go there and find out how the things stand,
Was
how
it done
actually what
under
is happening.
Was it done under pressure from the allies?
Maybe some at the asking of some of the parties.
And
That
is
is
that
possible.
unfortunate that the allies have put pressure for this sort of thing?
You see, too much of pressure weakens the government sometimes. And that is why the allies should avoid it to the extent possible.
Can you tell us which ally you have in mind when you say too much pressure weakens the government?
I say, I know about ourselves, our party. We have given support to BJP.
And you never put pressure?
Unconditionally.
And you never put pressure?
No, not at all.
Okay, let me rephrase the question. It's not just that allies are putting pressure. It's not just that they are pursuing state demands ahead of national interests. It's also the way they are doing it. Jayalalitha frequently stages walks out of parliament. She frequently threatens in public to withdraw support. Mamata Banerjee boycotts parliament. Is it right that one member of the government should embarrass another member in this public way?
You see, they are very experienced politicians, both Mamata also and Jayalalitha also. And perhaps they have not been in a government, in a coalition government like this earlier. That is why there are some difficulties.
Okay, experienced they may be, but are they behaving maturely?
See, I won't be able to comment on their behavior. Nobody comment on their behavior. They have their own ways, own their method.
In the public eye, the crux of the problem seems to be Ms. Jayalalitha's behavior. She's publicly criticized the Home Minister. She said that the Prime Minister needs a Gujarat doctrine in handling the allies. Now she said that her ministers aren't allowed to operate freely. At other times, she seems to assume the Prime Minister's prerogatives. The public impression is that she's, in a sense, holding the government to ransom.
That might be the public opinion. And there are difficulties sometimes. We feel there are difficulties. I myself feel that it should be more cohesive government. That is the feeling sometimes I get. But we can only request the allies to carry on.
She's just most recently raised the question that her ministers are not allowed to operate freely, that they can't even appoint their own personal staff.
I don't know whether they have any difficulties like that. I have not talked to them on this.
Are you allowed to operate freely?
No, I don't have that.
You have no problem?
No, I don't have any problems. We have problems at various levels. We do have problems sometimes. But we express our problems to the Prime Minister, to the other colleagues, and the problems are solved.
What sort of problems do you have?
In fact, no serious problems. Only working problems here and there.
So when Jayalalitha says that her ministers are not allowed to operate freely, do you think that she's exaggerating?
You see, well, so far there has been no interference in my working, as I have seen over the last 3 months, 3.5 months.
Do you have any reason to believe that the treatment of Jayalalitha's ministers is different to the treatment you or other ministers get?
You see, I don't think, because I know the Prime Minister, he does not interfere in anybody's working. He would sometimes talk to us very freely on subjects, mutual subjects, consult each other.
But he doesn't
He
interfere.
doesn't interfere.
Has he ever told you that you can have A on your staff, you can't have B on your staff? Has he ever tried to interfere in the appointment of people on your staff?
No, not in this manner. Not
So,
in this manner.
judging by your example, what Jaya Lalita is saying is unjustified or incorrect.
I don't know whether they had any problem. I don't know. That
But
is
you
what
at
I
least
say.
have never had. Okay, we've talked a lot about this. Let me try and sum it up because I want to now move on to other subjects. You have been in politics a long time. You've led a government in very difficult conditions yourself.
Yeah.
Today you're a member of a government which has an image problem. And where clearly, as you admit, things are not working as cohesively as they should. What's your advice to your fellow allies so that the government pulls together and becomes effective?
All effort by all the groups should be that they should continue in a proper manner so that we can deliver goods. As you earlier said, people are expecting a lot from this government, and a lot can be done only if we act cohesively, we act in a more befitting manner.
How do you act more cohesively? How do you act in a more befitting manner? What are the one or two steps you need to take?
Realizing the problems of each other. We see that sometimes being very assertive creates problems. Though your assertion might be correct so far as interest of your party or your state or your region are concerned, but still sometimes it is like that.
So you're saying that the allies need to be more understanding, there should be more of a spirit of give and take.
And that's right, it has to be.
What advice would you give the BJP, this biggest party, in terms of holding the government together better and improving its performance?
You see, the question is of governing a country with diverse religion, diverse languages, diverse cultures, as we have in India. So we have to be more liberal, I think, in our approach on various subjects.
Such as?
Such as Ram Mandir and others. So we had intentionally left it out of the national agenda for that very reason.
Are you saying that you're worried by the fact that BJP members, who may not be members of the government, people like K.L. Sharma?
Yes, sometimes there is some difficulty. Some statements slightly different from the stand of the government appear from the party workers. That creates some problems. That gives an insight in the thinking of the party sometimes. It is taken like that in fact there is some hidden agenda or secret agenda or anything like that. So people start talking about it.
And you want the BJP to tell its own party, please be more discreet, or at least please don't talk in public?
It should appear to be a secular government in the best interest of the nation.
What you're really saying is sometimes you have question marks about the secular credentials of the BJP and you want those removed.
I don't have that, but you see some statements here and there sometimes create that impression.
It's the different voices in the BJP that worry.
You see that sometimes create problems. Problems are created sometimes. So a problem was created recently about this construction of the temple, and then various statements this way and that way were started, and our energy was being wasted on that when we should be doing something else.
Do you think the Prime Minister or the Home Minister should take a more effective stand in controlling their party?
I think they should do it.
Control their party more effectively?
That's right. Because they are the governing party now. They should think that they are the governing party in the country, the major party. They should take all the allies with them in this. There should be more interaction of views. That is what I think.
So let me sum it up. What you're saying is the allies need to be prepared to give and take more,
Yes.
and the BJP needs to be prepared to reassure the allies on issues like Ayodhya that there's no two minds on the subject.
That's right.
Mr. Barnala, let's take a break there. I want to come back in part 2 and talk in a slightly more focused way about the functioning of the government and the leadership. But first we'll take a quick commercial break. See you in a moment. Welcome back. We're talking to the Minister for Chemicals, Fertilizers and Foods, Surjit Singh Barnala. Mr. Barnala, let's look in a more focused way at the functioning of the government. People look at the problems the budget is having, people look at the problems with the proposed power bill, and they say, this government either doesn't know what it stands for, or it doesn't know how to achieve what it wants. What's the problem?
No, I don't think so that it is like that. In a budget session, it's always like that. I've seen many budget sessions earlier also, and recently when I was a member of the parliament, not in the government. So it's always like that. When the budget session is on, different views emerge.
But in this case, the finance minister had to back off the petrol price hike, the urea hike, the import duties. There's now talk that in the new session, when it begins in July, he'll have to back off parts of the excise duty. People think either this government doesn't know what it wants to do, or it hasn't got the strength to do it.
You see, instead of sticking on to something which possibly might be wrong, I think it's better to roll back.
So you're
For example, the urea prices were increased. So then there was a realization and that perhaps it is not correct. And it was rolled back. There was nothing wrong about it.
So in other words, the 2 steps backwards, if I can call them that,
yes,
were actually sensible politics.
I think it is.
Not a defeat.
Not a defeat.
Okay, let me put the question differently. I suppose what I'm really asking is, does the government have the courage of its convictions? Let me give you an example. The Prime Minister almost every day says we want serious talks with Pakistan. The Home Minister often sounds provocative and belligerent. Are you happy with the way we are tackling Pakistan after the nuclear tests?
See, Home Minister has a different subject with him. His subject is how to control the insurgency in Kashmir, particularly the problem that they are facing. Sometimes a large number of persons are killed mercilessly. So Home Minister has to say something on that. He went to that area, he had to pacify people.
But don't you think the Pakistanis get confused and the world outside gets confused?
No, they should not get confused, because they know what is the problem that is being created by them. So they know that this problem is being created by them. That is why they should be knowing all that.
Okay, let me put a recent...
We can't let it proceed as it is.
And
the Home Minister has to say something on it, and he did say.
Okay, let me put a recent controversy to you. Mr. Jaswant Singh went to New York and very eloquently said, we are prepared to talk to Pakistan any place, any subject, any level, any time. Then when he came back, the subject arose, are you prepared to have discussions on the line of control issue if Pakistan raises it? And a major controversy broke out. What's your feeling? Should we be prepared to talk about the line of control as a solution?
You see, we have always been saying that according to Shimla Accord, we are willing to talk at any place, any time, and any subject. Line of actual control can be one of those subjects also. They might insist on it, we might say no, we don't accept it.
But we should be prepared to talk about it.
No, if they raise this issue, we can't say no, you can't raise this issue.
So this whole controversy,
I don't know
is
whether,
just stupid.
whether they will like to raise it or not. We don't know whether Pakistan will like to raise it or not. But we can't anticipate anything.
But if they raise it, we have to talk about it.
If they want to talk about Kashmir, then the talk should be on all subjects if possible.
So you're quite prepared that India must be prepared to talk about all subjects, all aspects of Kashmir.
You see, for peace in the region, particularly in the subcontinent, I think we should talk it over. Talking to each other, there's nothing wrong with it.
So the controversy that has emerged around Mr. Jaswant Singh's remarks is mistaken, it is wrong.
Sometimes controversies are raised for the sake of controversy, for raising controversy sometimes.
I understand.
So when we start talking on Kashmir, why not talk it whole hog? Then talking within the two countries, there's nothing wrong. We have been saying from the very start, let us talk together, let us sit together and talk about it.
Okay, Barnala Sahib, let me move to the last matter. You've been a chief minister, you've been a governor, you've been in politics. You know that at the end of the day, the image of a government is its leadership. It's created by the Prime Minister. There seem to be 2 schools of thought at the moment about Prime Minister Vajpayee's leadership. Some people say he's too soft, too understanding. and needs to be more assertive. He needs to be tougher. What's your feeling?
My feeling is that he is doing very well. He is acting as a good Prime Minister, a Prime Minister that India needs. That's my impression of him.
Does he need to be a little tougher when he handles some of
No,
the
it's
allies?
not necessary to be very tough also.
It's not necessary to be
Not
tough.
necessary to be very tough.
Does he need to be a
I'm
little...
using the word very tough.
But is it
Sometimes
necessary?
you see that also, I have seen Morarji Bhai, he was a little bit more tough than he needed to be. We had some difficulties with him.
Is the opposite true of Mr. Vajpayee? Does he need to be sometimes a little tougher than he is?
I think he is fairly tough. He doesn't yield on certain matters. When he has made up his mind, he doesn't yield.
What about in handling Jayalalitha? The public impression is that he gives in too often. Do you think he needs to perhaps stand up occasionally to correct the public impression?
You see, this is between the two leaders. She is the leader in her own area, in her own region. She has emerged as a leader, people's leader. She has been a chief minister. She is an experienced lady. She has been in the parliament also. So similarly, Vajpayee also is an experienced person. He has been in the parliament since very long.
Are you saying?
Yes.
Are you saying that the two of them must sort out their differences
See,
themselves?
They should. That is what people expect of them.
Are you encouraging them to actually do this? Do you think they're not doing it enough?
No, I think they should do it.
They should do it.
They should do it.
You're suggesting they should sit down quietly together
They should sit down and sort out matters
and they should do this quickly.
quickly.
Have you given him this advice?
No, I have not talked to him, but we do, whenever we meet, we do talk things like that.
And if they don't sit down quickly and sort out matters and this kit-pit continues, that's bad for the government.
That is not in the national interest.
So in the national interest, Mr. Vajpayee should take the initiative, sit down personally with Ms. Jayalalitha and sort it out.
Sort it out. That is how I think about it.
They need a sort of mini summit between them, don't they?
They do.
Huh?
They do.
Finally, one last question. People in the press, people in politics have begun to comment that this government is surviving because Sonia Gandhi is not ready to overthrow it. Are you living on borrowed time?
No, that's not so. I see they were never ready so far to form a government. They don't also have numbers. And the persons who are now saying, well, we can support you, the Congress knows that ultimately they won't support them. They might not support them. All different type of persons who have been totally against the Congress, who have been fighting the Congress, not now only, for a long time. They might not go very far with the Congress.
So the Congress threat is not a threat you take seriously?
For the time being, there's no threat, I think.
Will the government last to the end of the year?
I think so.
Are you definite?
No, I'm not definite. I'm very hopeful.
That's your answer. I'm not definite, but I'm hopeful. So there is doubt.
Oh, that can be doubt always. In a setup like this, there can be doubts.
Mr. Barnala, for that very frank answer and for talking so candidly about the whole subject that we've discussed, thank you very much for speaking to In Focus.
Thank you very much for the interview you have taken.
That's it for this week. We'll be back next week with another interviewee, but for today, from Mr. Surjit Singh Barnala's residence in Tughlaq Road, New Delhi, goodbye.